All right, so good morning, Pastor Lyndon Allen. Greetings from Israel. I hope you're doing well. As you know, we've been talking about the whole issue of aggressive force used by law enforcement towards the African American community. It's an issue dear to my heart since I witnessed the video for 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a law enforcement officer using his knee and suffocating and murdering an African American male. And obviously, since then, the world has changed literally from that horrendous act of taking a human being's life. And the purpose for the conversation today is really to give an understanding and an education to the Jewish community of where they need to be right now with the African American community. So first of all, thank you for joining me in the conversation.
David, it is easy to join you regarding any conversation because you are one of the dearest friends of my life. I would not be doing what I'm doing in the space of pro-Israel advocacy were it not for the passion and generosity of the center of CJCUC. I love you guys deeply. You sponsored my first trip to Israel. It was your inaugural trip of pastors to Israel, and I was honored and privileged to be a part of that. So it's a joy to be with you. And beyond that, we both have sons named Jonathan. Imagine that.
Yeah, not only that, we also hung out with one another. Our families were hanging out with one another. Besides seeing you at the CUC DC Summit, we live it. We live it. It's not hard because we start with the premise, and it's more than a premise. It is fact. It is core to our beings as creations on the planet. We are of one blood. We all go back to the same ancestral parents, Adam and Eve, and the color of our skin is actually something that God celebrates. God looks at diversity and celebrates, and man looks at diversity and segregates. And until we elevate our thinking to that of Hashem, to that of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God that Jesus, as a Christian, he was pointing us to. And until we get to that core issue, until we start with that solid foundation that we are truly one blood, we are Adam, which is the Hebrew word for human, really nothing's going to change, David. See, this was the shocking point that I had with you, because when I called you up, I said, Pastor Lyndon, tell me what I need to do. And you said to me, stop. And I said, why am I stopping? Just, give me the organization. What are the 5 points we can come together for on this issue of aggressive force by law enforcement against the African American community? And you said, before you can go to a solution, you need two things: language and empathy.
Yeah.
To me, that was like, wait, why are we having a discussion about the language? For me, obviously, you're created in the image of God, but you said to me, that's obvious for you, David, but that's not obvious for the conversation that needs to be done in order to go to proper and more humane way of the police engaging with the African American community.
Yeah, but it's particularly in the community of people of faith, and the faith of which I'm speaking is Judeo-Christianity, the people who believe in the God of the Bible. 2 Chronicles 7:14, even though the application and the context is about God speaking to Solomon at the opening of the temple, he said, look, if you guys stray, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I'll hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. So it's obvious that the precedent of the God of the Bible is, if a few people, the ones who know me, if you know me, I will heal your land. In other words, I will affect the many because of the actions of a few. So what can the few do? Men like you and men like me who love the God of the Bible, we need to sound like him when it comes in terms of describing humanity. And that means wholeheartedly, fast stop, quick jettison of the language of Darwin, of the language of race theory. Race theory is what led 6 million people into ovens and they were burned. Race theory is what caused people to go down to Africa, scoop up those whom they thought were closer to animal than human, ship them across the Atlantic, and none of what we are dealing with will change. Because the minute we enter the language of race theory into the conversation, we're immediately separated. What do I mean by that? Race theory would purport that every species on the planet has a different set of ancestral parents. Not so. God doesn't teach us that. God has proven, and science doesn't even back that up. I have an article from the Scientific American from 2003 that clearly indicates that there are pretty much five genetic markers that we use to define race culturally: eye color, skin color, hair texture, and three others, or two others. And there are a plethora of other genetic markers that connect people beyond skin color. Example, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Aborigine from Australia, same skin color, but genetically totally dissimilar, so to speak. In other words, there may be more in common with me and Larry Bird from the Celtics than you and Larry Bird.
Really?
And genetic.
I'm a 5'9" Jew. What are you talking about? I have everything
And
in
I'm
common with Larry
6'3".
Bird.
And I'm 6'3", you know? So these things that we use as genetic markers to define race really are not backed by science when you look at the concept of race theory, which has its pinnacle in Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin wrote the work in 1859 called Origin of Species, but that was not the full title. The full title was Origin of Species on natural selection or preservations of favored races. So preservation of favored races. So that word race got a boost into the lexicon of Western thought, Western language, and we now speak in terms of humanity completely through a Darwinian lens, which would suggest that man is really nothing more than another category within creation, no different than a giraffe. Now, Darwin was a monogynist, meaning one set of ancestral parents to cover all of creation, which would include a giraffe or a primate. There were other race theorists who believed in polygyny, multiple sets of initial ancestral parents. So that concept, neither of those concepts is supported by the Bible. God does not teach that. God teaches that man is separate and distinct from a giraffe, because God didn't make man. God made man in his image. He did not make a giraffe in his image. Last time I checked, giraffes and primates are not made in the image of God. We are. So if you're dealing with ethnic disparity, because that's what we're dealing with regarding the passage of George Floyd, this country, our country here in America, we are reeling with ethnic disparity. See, God would not describe what we are going through as a race war. No, it's ethnic disparity, because from one blood created he all the nations, or ethnos, on the planet. We can have multiple ethnicity. That's great. Multiple ethnicity within the framework of humanity is wonderful. Ethnicity is the reason why the Scotsman wears a kilt and the Ghanaian wears kente. Ethnicity is the reason why we don't go to Yugoslavia for a taco. We go to Mexico or California or Texas for that. Ethnicity is why we go to the Austrians and the French for croissants. They make the best, which is fine. Ethnicity means we go to Israel for hummus. That's all great.
Okay.
That is all wonderful. We can have a plethora of ethnic flavor. Always talking from the standpoint of race, it's like you're on that side of the line, I'm on this side of the line. We're trying to deal with our property disputes and where the line should be, or how much of property or land you should have, or how much I should have. What if the two property owners are brother and sister? Now the dispute changes. Well, we're blood. We got the same dad and mom. So, as a matter of fact, don't even put up a fence. Let's let our kids just play in the open yard. You have that house, I have this house. We know the property line is somewhere around here, but we're not going to put up a fence because our premise is you're coming to my house for Thanksgiving. We're going to be family. We have to jettison the language of race theory because its premise is from the onset. The minute we say the word race, we're completely in Darwin's camp, which says, you're over there, I'm over here, we're going to try to deal with our issue, but we're not really one. If we deal with it from God's perspective, we are first one. Now let's talk about the problem. We're family.
So as you're suggesting as the Jewish community and the Christian community, not to really use the term race, that we should be, that if we're having the conversation among us, then we should always begin with what it means to be Adam, humanity, humane. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? So my question to you is, since the world is dealing with in terms of race, and we're coming with the language of Adam, it feels like it will feel by the other people who are the leaders in that movement who don't necessarily subscribe to a Judeo-Christian value as semantics, as just a play on words.
Excellent. I appreciate that. That's an excellent point. And here's what I would say to that.
Okay.
From the onset, I said that race theory can be refuted strictly on science without even bringing up the Bible. There was an article back in Newsweek back in 1988, and it had on the cover an Adam and an Eve, and this is the genesis, so to speak, or the embryonic stage of the genome project. And they took all the genetic data that they could and crunched the numbers, and here's what they came up with. They said, we have discovered, and this is Newsweek, 1988, we have discovered that all of humanity can be traced to one woman. One woman. But we have a dilemma because this woman, and for lack of a better name, and this is the article, this is a completely scientific article, it had no Judeo-Christian bias or framework at all, other than what I'm about to say. He said, we can clearly see that the data is revealing that all of humanity can be traced to one woman. For lack of a better name, we're going to call her Eve because everybody kind of understands the Eve concept. So we're calling her Eve. But we have a dilemma. We cannot figure out why Eve's father and husband are the same individual, because the data is revealing that Eve's father and husband were the same guy. When I read the article, I went, I know why that is. She came from his rib. And there's enough genetic information in a rib to make another human being. And that's exactly what God did. She came from his rib, formed, life was breathed into her, and then he impregnated her. So there was the conundrum solved. And I went, wow, God. No mention of God in this article. Science does not back Darwin's theory. Now, I don't even give cover to the term human race, because that would purport that man is nothing different than in the category of life than, like I said, like a giraffe or a primate. No, we are separate and distinct. We are the pinnacle.
We're families, we're tribes, we're, right, we're nations, we're peoples. You want to keep it very much in the biblical framework. Is that correct?
Well, not totally. Now, I want to be able to talk about the issue.
Right. So that's the thing. Can I talk about race with you? Because everyone else out there
is speaking
race, and I feel like if I continue to speak, well, humanity, and not address the term race, well, then you don't. It feels like to the people in that conversation that I'm not authentic or even empathizing.
Well,
which is what I really want to do is empathize, obviously, but also come to action.
All right. So, all right. Let's do a hypothetical. We can do some role playing here. An individual wants to talk race about the issues, black race, white race, Chinese race, this, that, and the other. I would say, you know what? We all have the same bloodline. We're all one. We can talk in terms of oneness. You are a human being. I'm a human being. I don't want to minimize your humanity. I want to identify with it. The community of faith that is Judeo-Christian, Jews and Christians together, seeking to really implement tikkun olam, to heal the world. We can't heal the world without addressing the language of the world and helping the world understand there is a better and higher way to look at this. George Floyd was seeking the same oxygen that Derek Chauvin was breathing. George Floyd was, as a man, as a human being, was crying for the same air his perpetrator was breathing. That alone proves we're both human. Don't dehumanize me. And it's going to take some education to help people understand that Darwin was wrong. You know, Darwin's cousin, 10 years later, a man named Francis Galton, implemented what we now call the concept of eugenics, whereby there is a strata of human value, so to speak.
Right.
That there are certain individuals on the scale of humanity that have more value than others. Hitler picked up on this. There were eugenicists here in the United States that were practicing full-blown population control, full-blown limitation of the growth of the population of newly emancipated slaves. These were newly emancipated. And at the turn of the last century, the work of the eugenicist Francis Galton and his cohort is that there are certain people on the planet who are closer to animal than human. Therefore, their population needs to be limited. And one individual, case in point, her name was Margaret Sanger. And Hitler picked up on the language and ideology of the eugenicist of the day to espouse his foul Aryan supremacy, which led him to reduce precious Ashkenazi Jews to the level of vermin, and actually circulated images vis-a-vis the work of Joseph Goebbels to illustrate that Jews are less than human and they're vermin, and since they're not human, it makes it easier for us to eradicate them. When you have a bug, first thing you want to do is kill it. Sadly, race theory affected the mind of eugenicists like Charles Darwin, like his cousin Francis Galton, and sadly, like Adolf Hitler. Sad. So we have to get people back to oneness. We share a common humanity. If we don't do that, David, if we don't get to you're human, I want to get away from race because that word is charged with separation. It's charged with separation because the foundation of the word is that of a separatist. It is. And we're not going to solve something that the separatists created using their language. It's just not going to work.
What's the way to empathize besides just saying, I'm with you, brother, I'm with you, sister, during your time of this challenging season, of what's happening right now with the Black community? Is there a way to do it? Is there who you make the call to? I think for Jews, we like to just tell me exactly what we need to do. We'll do it, and we want to be able to address the issue. I think it's the same thing that when we were dealing with when Blacks and Jews working together. I know this was maybe a foreign concept for many who grew up in this era, but there was a time that Blacks and Jews actually worked together. Booker T. Washington with Rosenwald. They created over 5,300 schools to educate Blacks in the South under Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. Right? You can point out that the NAACP was created with Jews and Blacks together in the Civil Rights Movement.
We shouldn't rush past that point because that's key. W.E.B. Du Bois worked with Rosenwald, Joel Spingarn. There is an award that is given out to this very day called the Spingarn Award. It's named after a Jew. And Jewish civil rights activists, African American civil rights activists, were working together to advance colored people because Reconstruction was halted. You know, if Reconstruction were allowed to flourish, there would have been no need for the NAACP. Not at all, because it would have flourished, which is why we refer to Tim Scott as the first senator who was Black since Reconstruction, because before or during Reconstruction, a plethora of African American representatives as elected officials were going to DC representing their various jurisdictions. So when the NAACP was founded, Jewish American civil rights activists found common heart and common ground with the suffering of African Americans who were being systematically barred from participating in the joys of being in American society, living wherever you wanted to live, working wherever you sought to work, and advancing with your blood, sweat, and tears to climb whatever corporate ladder you chose. And those opportunities were banned and barred to the African American. I mean, it was like a wind tunnel was turned on. Like you have one ethnic group who decides, okay, here in our land, anyone who looks like us will have open access to every strata of our societal existence. But if we see those people trying to come into the issue, we'll turn on a wind tunnel and give them resistance. We will put them in certain neighborhood enclaves. If we see them trying to vie for apartments in certain buildings, we'll code their application and create a blacklist. Yeah, that's where the phrase came from. Blacklisted means you're going to get barred from participating in said endeavor. If you're a GI and you're Black and you came from World War II and you helped defend this nation and we have created a GI Bill, that's not for you. No, it's going to be for the other guy. We're not doing that for you. Well, wait a minute. I fought over there against Hitler. We won. I helped. You're going to help me, right? No. Well, why? Because you look like that. Well, why are you doing that? Because I can do it just like that guy. This is not for you. This society really isn't for you. And if you live under that, generation after generation after generation, you can you can literally pass down the mindset of subjugation and being subjugated to the point where it affects how you live, how you think about yourself, and in some cases grow to despise what God gave you. That some people haven't tasted. That some people have not experienced. But the God of heaven would call all of us to empathize with a brother who lost his brother to the knee of another member of humanity. We can empathize with the loss of a brother. We may not have experienced it, but can we first come alongside before we start pointing fingers and saying, well, he committed currency fraud, or he committed check fraud, and he was on drugs or whatever. He was a human being who lost his life because someone decided, I am going to be judge, jury, and executioner right now. Now that means Mr. George Floyd was denied due process because Dylan Roof, he went into a Carolina church and killed 9 people. And if there were anyone who possibly could be justified, or you need to die on the spot, it would have been him, because he was obviously, he was guilty and found as such guilty. But his arrest was incident free, and he committed murder, and his arrest was incident free. But George Floyd committing white collar crime, currency fraud, he dies from a gesture, the knee, from a gesture that is normally associated with humility. Taking a knee is a gesture that's assumed when a teammate is down during play. If kids are playing soccer, someone gets hurt. Kids are playing football, someone gets hurt. Basketball, whatever the sport, someone gets hurt. Here in America, you take a knee as a sign of your humanity is being observed right now.
For many in the Jewish community, they don't necessarily have a person they feel that can call up within the Black community and say, I'm empathizing with you at this moment. So is it like I put my Facebook post up and say I'm empathizing with the Black community at this moment in time? Is it that we call up the local clergy member that is the voice of the community of where that Jew is living? Like, you want to empathize, you just don't. The question is where do we go and how do we empathize?
We have to start off with language that declares, first and foremost, we are of the same ancestral parents. We're one. There's no difference between you and me. We're one. We are human. There's not even a human race like I talked about earlier. We are human. We share that in common. Now, let's talk about it. You just lost.
So that's the conversation. So who do we have the conversation with? Are we calling up the local? Is the rabbi calling up the local African American pastor?
Sure. And that rabbi.
I think that's the important thing for many Jews. I think we're in paralysis right now. We're getting caught up. Many are getting caught up. I'm not saying all, but many are getting caught up in Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Sort of the slogan fight in the ring right now. Everyone has to be in their corner.
Hashtag wars.
Hashtag wars, right? So we see that. There are some people. There are people in the Jewish community that can't align itself with the Black Lives Movement official movement because certain things that come out from the Black Lives Movement.
Totally understand.
It's going against the identity of who we are as Jews.
Absolutely, and I'm not calling them to do that. I really am.
Right. So basically, are you advocating that the rabbi with the congregation calls up the local Black church?
Okay, let's give a scenario.
So this will help. You understand?
Yeah, totally get it.
You know this. You've been dealing with Jews for almost
13 years.
13 years. Okay, you know that.
I was born in Brooklyn, so I lived with black hats on Saturday. I thought the whole world was like this, and when I left and went to California, I went, "Where are the black hats on Saturday?" You know,
so if you know us, then you'll say, "Okay, so tell me what I'm supposed to do."
Here's what I would suggest. Here's what I'd suggest. Do what you did. You called me. You had no idea that I was going to say, let's tap the brakes and let's talk about language. And first, you thought I was going to have a simple conversation and sound like your garden variety late night talk show host saying race, or your garden variety news anchor, race, race, race. But I stopped and said, I'd like to introduce something to you. What? I'd like to introduce to you that race theory is crippling us as a culture. Why? And we went into it. We had a discussion about that first, and then, wow, okay, now let's talk about the ethnic rub that's happening when we know the premise is first and foremost, we're one. So if a rabbi enters a conversation with an African-American pastor, knowing that, okay, I may have to first challenge race theory, then start there. Empathy. So it's language and empathy, language and empathy. You can start with, I know you're hurting. Your people have suffered, and we feel that suffering because we are one. How can you say we're one? Here's why. Race theory is a fallacy.
Okay.
Race is a fallacy. And I would encourage your viewers, your listeners, to your podcasts, that we really have to attack our language and really address it, because we do not sound like the Melech HaOlam when we speak in the language of the race theorist. And we're defeated from the onset. I mean, the word race, in terms of how race theorists use it, bounces out of the mouths of men and women of faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as frequently as the word the. It just bounces right. We are so used to saying and framing things in that way that we don't even think about it. It just flows out of us because that's how we have been trained. We grew up in American schools that teach the theory of Darwin. And we're constantly framing humanity in terms that the God of heaven does not. Will never solve the problem until we first establish clearly, concretely, that we are one. When you're one, then you can deal with the problem.
Pastor Lyndon, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Continue to go ahead and work together to address these issues that are affecting the African American community. So blessings from.
I love you deeply. You are.
I'm going to be able to see you soon. Hopefully, once Ben Gurion Airport opens up, we'll be able to see each other, and we'll go to the baseball game together.
I might be coming there later in the year, in the fall. We'll see if they'll open up the airport, but who knows? This thing is so fluid. What's going on? So, love you, David.
Love you too, Pastor Lyndon. Be well. God bless.
Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem.